In this video, I'll cover 15 methods I use to keep my greenhouse warm in the winter. Now, some of these are unique to the design of my geothermal greenhouse, but most of them will work in any greenhouse anywhere, specifically numbers 6 through 9 and 12 through 15. All right, let's get started. First up, let's talk about the walls of the greenhouse. There are 3 traits of the walls that help it either collect or store heat. The first thing is that I made the entire greenhouse, the walls are made of 3/4 inch plywood, inside and out. That means the walls are very thick and have a lot of thermal mass. On top of it, as you've seen in other videos about the pallet wood siding, the whole building is clad in pallet wood, which is very thick. And so that adds another layer of wood to the already thick wall. So thick walls is point number 1. The second one is I insulated the walls heavily. I went onto Facebook and Craigslist and other places where I could find styrofoam that people were giving away. And I would use that styrofoam, cut it down into pieces, and cram it into the walls as I was building them. The third area is that the interior walls are all clad in 2 layers of heavy professional grade weed barrier, specifically black weed barrier. And well, what does that do? Let me show you. A great way to illustrate the benefit of having dark colors on the walls of a greenhouse is today. It's a typical New England fall day. It's about 50 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And if you notice, the temperature of this white bucket is about 90 degrees. However, the temperature of the wall is about 120 degrees. So whenever possible, use dark colors in your greenhouse and they will collect additional solar energy. The next section is the windows and the doors. I made sure to use heavy window and door weather stripping to make sure that no air is leaking around any of them. Next, I insulated the windows and the roof panels with clear plastic. I did this by making wooden frames that I then stretched clear greenhouse plastic over them, stapled it to the frames, and then screwed all of those frames over every single window as well as the roof panels. What this does is it creates an air gap in front of every window and roof panel that acts as a type of insulation. The fact that it's plastic also helps to seal any air moving in and out of the building. All right, so next up is the floor of the greenhouse. In the process of doing research for this building, I came across a construction concept in insulation called a Swedish skirt. And go ahead and Google that, check that out. It's a pretty interesting concept where you insulate the area outside of a building on the ground. That made me kind of realize how I wanted to lay out the inside of my greenhouse. I ultimately ended up with a raised bed inside the greenhouse. And the floor that's surrounding that raised bed is all heavily insulated with 2-inch styrofoam foil-backed foam. On top of that, the area behind the bed here is covered in thick pavers. They're about 4 inches thick. I had them left over from a greenhouse that I had made years ago. And so the combination of those 2 things, in addition to many layers of construction grade weed barrier that's below the insulation and above the insulation, there is a huge amount of thermal mass and storage in the ground. And on top of that, I covered all of the floor that was left over with the leftover rock from when I was jackhammering out this location. And so there's this heavy, thick layer of gravel that surrounds the bed. So all of this works together to store heat when you need it most. Another feature that contributes to my greenhouse's ability to hang on to heat is the raised bed. Now, there's 3 specific areas where the raised bed is able to hold on to heat or to collect heat. The first is that it's made out of gabion baskets, which are essentially baskets filled with stone. And stone has excellent thermal mass. It collects heat, holds onto it, and then slowly releases it overnight. On top of that, the inside of the bed where the soil is has a layer of 2-inch styrofoam insulation. So that is an additional way that I'm able to hold on to heat. And then a third way that this bed holds on to heat, or specifically collects heat, is it has 2 layers of heavy grade weed barrier on the inside and the outside of the bed. And as I demonstrated on the wall, whenever you have black material, it collects heat. And so the idea for me was that I have this heavy black material that's collecting heat, and then you have the stone behind it that's storing the heat. And overall, this is something that I think helps in contributing to the heat of the greenhouse. Of course, at this point, I have to mention kind of the central concept that I designed the greenhouse around, and that is a G.A.H.T, or a ground air heat transfer system. Essentially, it's a geothermal means of heating and cooling the greenhouse. So I dug out an area that's about 6 feet deep underneath the area where I built the raised bed. And I laid out hundreds of feet of 4-inch perforated pipe. This gives me access to the warm temperature that's below the surface of the ground. It's a constant around 55 degrees. And so by means of the control systems and the fans, I'm able to bring the greenhouse up to about 55 degrees just with this system by itself. Add on top of that, that the whole G.A.H.T is insulated, meaning that the soil that I dug out, I insulated all the way around it with 2-inch styrofoam. So those two things by themselves contribute immensely to the overall warmth of the greenhouse. While I'm talking about the G.A.H.T, I should also mention another decision that it led me to. And that is, after I insulated the roof of the greenhouse, I decided to build a drop ceiling made out of R6 insulation foam. And what this does is it reduces the amount of air volume in the greenhouse that I need to heat up. And it also holds the heat in by means of the drop ceiling. Another technique that I use to store heat in the greenhouse is water, using the thermal mass of water. And so here in the front of the bed, I have a dozen black 1-gallon water bottles. Black obviously is helpful because it's going to collect more heat, and then the water is going to store the heat. I also have 2 50-gallon barrels that are part of the watering system for the greenhouse. And so all in all, I have over 100 gallons of thermal mass just from water that I am able to use to store heat that will be slowly released overnight in the greenhouse. Another obvious method of keeping your greenhouse a little bit warmer in the winter is by using a heater. And this might be a wood stove, a gas or electric heater, or in my instance, a terracotta heater. I'm very happy with this particular design that I came up with, and it does the trick in adding a few additional degrees to the overall temperature of a greenhouse. This year I decided to add a foyer to the greenhouse. The idea is that it will make it possible for me to prevent as much air escaping the greenhouse that I worked so hard to save when I'm going in and out of the greenhouse. Kind of like an airlock in a spaceship. Now, on top of that, I tried to make sure that I applied the same concepts in the foyer that I did in the rest of the greenhouse. So the walls are heavily insulated, and the walls and the doors are painted black, in a hope of collecting and storing heat. The last concept that I wanted to mention when it comes to keeping your greenhouse warm is the physical location and orientation of the structure. Try to keep in mind where the sun is going to be in a low winter sky. It might mean that you need to turn the structure a little bit or move it into a different location on your property. On top of that, you want to minimize the amount of shade that's hitting your greenhouse. Now, it's fall right now, and so the trees still have their leaves on them. But within the next few weeks, all of the leaves are going to be falling off of these trees, and there will be hardly any shade hitting my greenhouse. And that's what you want. You want the most amount of solar energy making it into your greenhouse so that you can catch it and store it. So whatever you can do to minimize the amount of shade that's hitting your greenhouse, the better. If that's trees, if you need to move it away from a structure, all of these things are very important when it comes to keeping your greenhouse warm in the winter. So there you have it, 15 things that I do to keep my greenhouse warm. If you have any questions or comments or want to just let me know what you're working on, leave it in the comments section below. And thanks for watching the video all the way to the end. If you like this video, you might like these.